Welcome to The Green Urbanist, the podcast for urbanists fighting climate change. I'm Ross. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode. Ross here. If you're new to the podcast, the Green Urbanist podcast is all about how cities and the people who work in them can effectively respond to the climate and biodiversity crises. If you've listened in the past, you'll know I'm becoming increasingly interested in urban rewilding. I previously did an episode introducing this concept a few episodes back. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Sean McCormack to talk about rewilding Ealing and rewilding projects that are in urban London. So Sean is a consultant vet, trained as a veterinarian. He's also the chairperson of Ealing Wildlife Group and runs a really good podcast called Sean's Wild Life, which I really recommend you listen to if you're interested in wildlife or biodiversity at all. He's also an incredibly knowledgeable nature conservationist and educator based in West London. In this episode, I go out to his patch in Ealing, West London, and we walk around some sites that he is involved in rewilding, and we talk about his work to rewild urban London by reintroducing harvest mice, beavers, and eventually maybe even water voles, while supporting native predators like falcons and owls right in the city. It's a really positive and inspiring story of how a community and a local government are working together for the good of nature. We also discuss how reintroducing beavers will help to mitigate flooding in the local area, and advice for other people interested in urban rewilding and nature conservation, and how you can get involved and start to make change in your local area. Me and Sean had a great chat, obviously being two Irish people, and he was very generous with his time, and we ended up talking for about 2 hours as we were walking around the site. So this episode is just part one of that conversation. Part two will be coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. If you want to see some images of the site that's being rewilded, go to the companion blog post, which is on my Substack blog. You can find a link to that in the episode description, where you'll also find a link to Ealing Wildlife Group's website, where you can learn more about the stuff that they're doing. But for now, enjoy the episode. Okay, well it's a cool August morning in West London. I'm here in Ealing with Sean from Ealing Wildlife Group, to use your proper name. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi Ross, yeah. You're here at Horsenden Farm, which is a brilliant community farm. There's a lot going on here. It looks quiet today, but generally it's hustle and bustle. And it's basically council-owned community farm with a lot going on in terms of different little businesses and community groups operating from here. We do a lot of our conservation work on Horsenden Hill, which is one of the largest conservation areas in the borough of Ealing. So it's a over 100 acre site in the north of the borough, and a really precious little gem that I'm going to bring you to soon. On the opposite side of the canal to where we are now is called Paradise Fields, and Paradise Fields is where we are reintroducing beavers to urban London for the very first time. So it's a really special place. I think you would agree that you kind of feel you're out in the countryside rather than in London, but it's just off the central line of Perryville. So really special place, and I'm happy to show you around.
Amazing, fantastic. It's really good to be here, and it does feel like, I can see those sort of historic farm buildings. It looks like a piece of sort of tranquil countryside that London has just built around and left it intact.
Yeah, it's got an interesting history actually. Believe it or not, it used to be a working farm not so long ago, just over 100 years ago, and it was hay meadows, and basically it was producing hay to cart down the canal on boats to central London to feed horses that were coming to the city and bringing goods and services to the city. So it was a very important farm to feed hay and drive the country's economy. And nowadays those hay meadows have been turned into high-level stewardship hay meadows for wildflowers and biodiversity, and it's very much a conservation area.
Marvellous, okay. Before we get into talking about the sites, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your work with the Ealing Wildlife Group?
Sure, yeah, I'll try and give you the whistle-stop tour. So my name's Sean McCormack. I am a vet by day, and I guess on the side, I work as a conservationist on a voluntary basis. I kind of took the fairly typical route of becoming a vet and going into clinical practice and treating domestic and exotic pets in London. Before I was a vet, I studied animal science, so that included quite a bit of kind of ecology, habitat management, conservation. And I guess after about 6 years of working in clinics and treating London's pampered pooches, I got a little bit jaded with that approach to my career and thought, I can't do this forever. The public are bonkers. I don't know if this is my true calling in life. So I guess before I was ever a vet, I was always a naturalist and a nature nerd, and turning over rocks as a kid and looking at bugs and creatures, similar to a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, who are interested in green issues. And yeah, I just kind of thought, do you know what, I want to get back to my true calling, which seems to be more macro level, wider thinking, planet, ecology, environment, nature, wildlife. Brilliant. And didn't really know how to do that, but kind of landed in a position where I got an industry job as a veterinary consultant, and was out of the clinical life and that quite harrowing work-life balance of working in vet clinics all the time, and suddenly had some time on my hands, and kind of by accident set up a little Facebook group which has taken over my life, which is Ealing Wildlife Group. We started it to do some bat walks in the summer of 2016, and put a post out on a local Facebook group and said, would anyone be interested in going on a bat walk this summer? Would you donate £1 or £2 towards the cost of a bat detector? And over 400 people in my local area said yes. Wow. And their Ealing Wildlife Group was born. So set up Ealing Wildlife Group as a Facebook group, and then slowly started to become a bit more active in the community and in our green spaces, collaborating with our local park rangers, and starting to do some kind of grassroots community volunteer-led conservation projects. And it's grown from there. We're now at 5,500 members on Facebook. We have quite a big volunteer list who are active. We've taken on a local derelict allotments and turned it into a community nature reserve. We have done various species-focused conservation projects. So here at Horsenden, we do a lot of work with grey-crested newts. We have barn owls breeding again in Ealing. We've got a webcam on some peregrine falcons on Ealing Hospital. And we've reintroduced harvest mice, our smallest native rodent, to the meadows around the farm here, which have been kind of rewilded in a sense, in terms of stepping back on their management and allowing them to kind of grow into more rugged, rough, scrub-like terrain. Yeah, we kind of jokingly a few years ago at the start of lockdown said we're launching Rewilding Ealing initiative and reintroducing Britain's smallest native rodent, and who knows, in a few years we may introduce Britain's largest native rodent. And here we are now, literally in a couple of months, about to reintroduce beavers to urban London for the very first time.
Amazing. And I think just to paint a picture for people of how actually amazing all of that is. I mean, we're in Ealing. It's not central London, but we're not on the edge of London either.
No. I mean, Ealing Broadway is zone 3 on the central line, so very much on the outskirts, but not out in the back of Beyonds or on the periphery of the tube line. Here at Perryvale in the north of the borough, we're I think zone 4. So it is kind of urban suburban London, but we're very, very lucky in Ealing, and this is one of the reasons we have so much wildlife and biodiversity. We're very lucky that we have green spaces which are intact and connected. So Horsenden is almost like the jewel in our crown. It's like our biggest intact kind of contiguous green space, I suppose. But we have a green space in Ealing called the Brent River Park, which runs from the north of the borough here at Perryvale right down to Brentford and into kind of Hounslow Borough, our next borough. And that follows the River Brent. And having that green space that kind of bisects the entire borough means that we've got really, really important wildlife corridor and that means that we have a lot of different biodiversity here. So we started with bats, and we always talk about bats being a really important indicator species for the health of our ecosystems. It's something that we monitor very closely, because the more bats you have, the more bat species, the more bat numbers you have in an area, the more intact and kind of healthy an ecosystem is. So we use those as kind of our indicators for what's going on. If you have, the bat biodiversity, you have a lot of other biodiversity too. So it kind of acts as a bit of a canary in the coal mine and to monitor over time. We've identified 7 species of bat in Ealing, which is quite cool. Yeah.
Are they all native?
All native species, yeah. We've got 17 native breeding species of bat in the UK and 7 that we've detected in Ealing. One is the brown long-eared bat, which is scarce in London. So yeah, we've got really, really important habitat. And I think the interesting thing about what's developed over time with Ealing Wildlife Group is by bringing people in with these kind of species-focused activities, like bringing people on bat walks after work on a summer evening, where all the family can come along and kids can stay up late and use electronic bat detectors to figure out what's flying around them at night that they would otherwise go unnoticed. Yeah. It's kind of also really mobilised the community to get behind protecting and advocating for our green spaces. And when threats come up, like for example, there was a suggestion that a massive music festival might be played on some of our precious meadows over here a few years ago. We got the community behind that and said, no, that's where we've reintroduced our harvest mice, and there's precious bats there, and there's barn owls breeding and things like that. So I think the kind of happy accident of Ealing Wildlife Group is that we've mobilised a community we didn't even know was there to speak up and act for our green spaces and why they're so important. No more so than post-lockdown, when everyone discovered just how important our green spaces were to get out and about.
That's so great, actually, because I think there is a really interesting tension with public green spaces in London, and I guess around the rest of England, is that they have so little government funding, perhaps compared to what they used to have, that they actually have to be quite entrepreneurial in terms of getting funding in. So a lot of the big parks in London do host these huge music festivals, which are make a lot of money, but probably good for the local economy, but they also cause a lot of damage to the soil, compacting the soil, shredding the earth of the grass that's there, in the summer. And I think the idea of having tens of thousands of people plus a sort of take a step back rewilding approach seems like it's probably not possible to combine those two things.
You can't combine the two. I wish you could. And it's always this like push-pull factor, and we got criticism, to be very honest, from the council of like scuppering their plans and bringing in this budget for the next 5 years for their parks team and things. And the parks team are amazing. We're very lucky to have really, really dedicated rangers on the parks team who are interested in biodiversity and are doing incredible things. And we know that needs to wash its face, and the council needs to raise money because there's been government cuts to council budgets and things. We used to have 16 rangers in Ealing. We now have 5 or 6. Wow, yeah. So things are tight, and we're honest and open and sympathetic to the fact that it's a difficult job to maintain those parks, but there's a place and a time for like generating revenue through trampling, grassland habitat into the ground, and these precious meadows over here were not the site for it. So as a community, Ealing Wildlife Group will stand up and say, actually, let's push back on these plans. Like, it's difficult, and I think sometimes it's different kind of ventures within the council not speaking to each other, and the events kind of side not talking to the parks team and not realizing that these meadows are not just like grass, they are wildflower meadows that have developed over the last 20 years, and they're the coronation meadows for London actually, that were put in at the start of the millennium. And we've reintroduced, as I say, harvest mice, and we've got barn owls breeding, and we've got various rare species here. So there's amenity grassland, and then there's kind of biodiversity-led projects like this. So it's always a balance, and there's always going to be conflict. And some people will just say, us conservationists are the NIMBYs, not in my backyard. We're always contesting development and different activities. We're not. We're just trying to maintain the integrity and connectedness and biodiversity value of some of our most precious habitats, and we recognise it sometimes causes conflict, but we do recognise that you have to have a balance and you have to suit everybody in the urban environment, and there's different motivations and there's different needs, and I think getting that balance right is one of the most challenging things in an urban kind of area in terms of conservation.
Very well said. In terms of talking a bit more about the reintroductions, that kind of thing, is there somewhere around here we can walk, or should we stay here and chat about
Absolutely. So what I'd love to do is show you, as I say, our smallest British rodent.
Yeah.
So we breed our harvest mice here at the farm.
Okay.
We've got a voluntary team called the Mouse Wives. And the Mouse Wives look after our mouse colony. I am very keen to say that they call themselves the Mouse Wives. That is not my male chauvinist label for them. They self-labelled themselves the Mouse Wives. And there's one mouse husband called Fred. Hi, Fred. And they look after the mice, and we breed them here in great numbers, and we put them out into 5 sites that are now really, really suitable habitat for harvest mice. And we're basically restoring a species that we've lost from the ecosystem in Ealing. The last known record of them is 1979.
Wow.
And we're putting them back, and they're kind of a real cool mascot or emblem of wilderness again.
Yeah.
And it's been an incredible project, really, really engaging for the community. We put them into people's hands, kids of all ages, and say, release your mouse back into the wild. And we just hit 1,200 mice back to the wild a couple of weeks ago. So let's go show you some.
Let's do it.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
This is our public display house of our harvest mice. So we have a behind the scenes breeding facility, but then we have this little public mouse house. And as you can see, there's one running on the wheel here, and there's a couple in the lower tanks. They are very, very cute, charismatic little creatures.
Tiny.
Absolutely tiny, aren't they? So they're our smallest native rodent, smallest rodent in Europe as well, and they're a really important part of our ecosystems that we've lost through agricultural intensification and kind of drainage of land. They quite like marshland and wetland habitats. They like the messy margins that we've kind of pushed right up to the edge in the countryside, especially, and we think we've lost them in Ealing. Locally, the last known record of them is 1979 at a local nature reserve, but they're a really important part of the ecosystem, and the project has kind of come as a kind of add-on project to our barn owl project. So we've been working very closely with the local council on how grasslands are managed in Ealing. The focus has very traditionally been on wildflower meadows in Ealing, and wildflower meadows are a man-made kind of artifact or habitat, I suppose, because it comes from the days of hay production and grass production for food for livestock. Taking an annual cut or a couple of annual cuts of hay off meadows and removing that material reduced the nutrients and allowed wildflowers to kind of flourish alongside grass species. Gotcha. But if we take an annual cut right down to the ground level, it leaves very little time or very little habitat for small creatures like mice and voles to actually persist in those meadows. So what we've done is we've changed some of the grassland management over with the council to allowing rough grassland to develop. And that's a kind of a 3-4 year cycle where not cutting the grass, just topping it to prevent scrub encroachment, allows a kind of a dead thicket or thatch layer to grow in the base of the meadow. And that thatch layer of dead straw where the grass grows 1 year, dies down, grows next year, dies down. Takes about 3 years for the thatch to grow, and then you get an influx or a population boom of field voles in particular, which are the main prey species for kestrels and barn owls.
Amazing.
So we've now got barn owls breeding again in Ealing, which you think of as a countryside bird, very much a farmland bird, but it's just about habitat management. And because we've created that kind of habitat around here, harvest mice actually thrive in that kind of habitat as well, and those kind of messy margins that we've allowed to grow back. So we've reintroduced them, put back a little cog in the food web that is missing, And not saying it's entirely due to these cute little mice, but we've had incredible results in terms of like kestrel numbers, egg and chick kind of fledging rates and things. We have a kestrel box just over the barn here up on the hill, which had last year 7 eggs laid in it, which is the maximum ever recorded for kestrels by the British Trust for Ornithology. So our kestrels here are fat and well fed and eating our harvest mice and our field voles.
Incredibly fertile.
Exactly, and that puts them in good stead to breed. But yeah, we don't like to think of them as oh, they're having a little spat here. We don't like to think of them as food for everything, but they are, and that's one of the things we're very honest with people about, because I think sometimes urban communities can look at nature in a, you know, Bambi tinted glasses and Disney-fied kind of outlook on it. We're very much kind of trying to almost use these harvest mice as a education tool to talk about ecosystem health and rewilding and why our green spaces are providing us with vital services like cleaning our air and cooling the urban surroundings and capturing carbon and helping with climate change, and why we really need to protect them so much and keep them connected and healthy and you know,
and that they'll provide those services, you know, ultimately when they're healthy and intact and have that food web.
Yeah, and it's a tricky message to send, because all of these things are quite intangible, and you know, we're talking about things that you can't very easily measure and that you can't very easily demonstrate, but using kind of a species focused lens on things and saying, look what we've done over the last 4 years, and now we've finally got barn owls breeding again. We've got 7 species of bat in Ealing, and one of those species is scarce in London, and we really want to cling on to it, and we've found them here. And harvest mice are going back into 5 sites in Ealing, and we really want to keep those sites, you know, healthy and biodiverse. And this is why I think using those little mascot species as a way of kind of, not to patronise, but educate the public on why nature is important in the urban context is just so important, and it's been so effective. These guys have been, no doubt, our most engaging project ever. We, as I say to you, we've, you know, put them in people's hands and asked people to come and help us release them. And when we started the project, we had a very modest budget of about $2,500 to buy our initial mice and some facilities to start breeding them here at the farm. And we said we'd do a crowdfunder to raise the money, and said you can sponsor your own Ealing harvest mouse for £10, and we raised the $2,500 in 48 hours.
Amazing.
People were like, there's 5 in my family, we'll have 5, you know, and people were just throwing us money to sponsor their own Ealing harvest mouse. And we've kind of gone, yes, your harvest mouse is still doing fantastically well in the wild.
Possibly has been eaten by a barn owl. We're not
No,
sure.
we don't say that. They only live a maximum of 18 months. So they're live fast, die young, produce, bottom of the food chain animal. But I think you'll agree, they're pretty darn cute, right? Look how amazing they are. This little lady, I think, is pregnant, if you look at her rounded belly. She's giving the male a hard time there. So she's going to pop a few little babies in the next few days, I would say. But you can see as they run around and walk on these twigs, they've got a prehensile tail. So they're using the tail to cling on to the twigs and branches, and they're what we call a stalk zone specialist. So the field voles are down in that thatch layer in the base of the meadows, feeding all our barn owls and kestrels. These guys are up in the thicket or thatch layer, where they're climbing on brambles and reeds and more of the coarse grass species in the kind of meadow margins and things. So they're all occupying a slightly different niche, and putting them back means that they're kind of a biodiversity magic pill for everything else. But yeah, these were our test case for our Rewilding Ealing initiative, and I jokingly kind of referred to them as that back in the day and said, we're going to start with harvest mice, our smallest rodent, and you never know, we might move up to our biggest rodent, the beaver. And everyone kind of laughed and went, as if we'd have beavers back in London or in Ealing. And I kind of bided my time on that, and now here we are, a few months away from actually releasing beavers.
It's fantastic, and you're not even the first, are you? Because in Enfield they've released two beavers.
That's right.
And I think there's talks of it happening in other parts. So it's really an idea that's catching on now.
It is. So we're not the first London project. Enfield released two beavers last year, and it's a brilliant project we've been up to visit. And it's the first London project, but not to steal their thunder, ours is the first urban London reintroduction of beavers.
It's quite on the edge there.
It is. Enfield is like on the outskirts of London, kind of Essex margins. It's on a kind of country estate. It's in a wood tucked away from any kind of urban area, and it's not accessible to the public. Basically, it's like an enclosure in a wood, so it's quite off the beaten track, and there's not a lot of public engagement around it. Whereas uniquely, our project is openly welcoming the public in. So Paradise Fields, where I'm going to bring you next, is part of the Capital Ring route around London. So it's a walking and cycling route around London, and we have one section that runs right through Paradise Fields. And very early on in our talks with the council and different groups, we decided, instead of putting an enclosure into Paradise Fields and having beavers in there and having people out here, we decided actually let's make the entire site the enclosure and keep people coming through and allow people to see a beaver wetland emerging over time. So it's going to be fully accessible, double gate, self-closing gate systems where people can come in but it won't let beavers out, is the theory. I hope it works. We might be a bit stressed in a few months when the beavers have other ideas, but that is the theory. We're going to have people walking through a beaver wetland emerging over time in urban London for the very first time in over 400, 500 years.
So that's quite interesting, because what I've heard about releasing these kind of wild animals is that you need to keep them, there's some sort of legislation or rules that you have to keep them separate from the public. How are you getting around that?
Yeah, so as I say, we are quite unique, and it's a pioneering project, and it needed a lot of negotiation with Natural England, who issued the licenses to do this. So the project has really been kind of in development for about 2 years. If we think about kind of engaging stakeholders and talking to the council who manage the land, and talking to the public. We did a public consultation about their kind of thoughts and concerns around it. Getting help from the Beaver Trust to do a feasibility study about the site, and it's been a long process, but we definitely needed to convince Natural England that this project was unique and worthy, and that we weren't just another, enclosed beaver trial that really wasn't learning anything new. We justified it on kind of three main objectives for the project. So one was studying beavers' impacts on an urban river catchment, specifically around flood mitigation, because the council had already earmarked Paradise Fields for engineering works that would alleviate flooding around Greenford Tube Station and the residential streets there, which is a high flood risk area. We went to them and said, do you know what, you can spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on man-made engineering works here, or you can invest a little bit in our beaver project, and then they will do that for free. So they'll slow the flow, they will create wetlands that catch rainfall in high rainfall incidents, and slow the flow of water through that site where, before water would rush through in a matter of kind of minutes from inflow to outflow. Now beavers, hopefully, over time with their dam and kind of pond systems, will percolate that water through much slower and catch it and release it. So we don't have the flooding downstream. That's the theory. The second objective was to look at the biodiversity benefits they would bring. So we know that beavers are like a biodiversity magic pill. You put them into a wetland and they catalyse some incredible processes and make it more dynamic and different, and fell trees, which some people are going to be shock horror. Trees are the solution to climate change. Beavers are eating trees. This is terrible. But actually, this is a natural process, and our trees have evolved alongside beavers and are designed to be chopped down by herbivores and grow again from the base, like coppicing. And we want to see that different dynamic vegetation structure, introducing pulses of light into the aquatic ecosystem, and light basically is the kind of base of the food chain for algae and plankton and small invertebrates and larger things like birds and bats and amphibians and reptiles and everything else. So we should see the biodiversity benefits, and we have a view to reintroduce water voles back to Ealing using the beaver site as our kind of first receptor donor site. And then the third objective of the plan is to kind of rewild urban human communities and show kind of the value of living alongside nature and truly dynamic ecosystems again, using this species, the beaver, as a keystone species, and saying, do you know what, they're not a wilderness species. They exist around urban centres all over the world. You know, I've seen beavers in Berlin, Munich, Vancouver. They don't need, you know, the wilderness of Russia or Alaska to thrive. They can do very well alongside us, and they can provide us benefits if you want to be very utilitarian about it. But also, they belong here. We made them extinct through hunting just 400 years ago, which is the blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, and they belong here. They should be back, and we're saying that it's only a matter of time before beavers come back in the UK to urban centres. Why don't we learn to live alongside them now and show how we can manage some of their negative or nuisance kind of behaviours in an urban context, and learn how to live alongside them before they make their own way back, because it's only a matter of time really before beavers start to colonise more urban centres. We know they're in Medway in Kent, which is on the outskirts of London to the south, and we know they're in Oxfordshire to the west, so we kind of started discussions through our project partner Citizen Zoo, set up a group called London Beaver Working Group about 2 years ago, and we started discussions on two main kind of themes, which were what should Londoners or stakeholders within conservation and nature management do if beavers turn up in London, and are there places in London where we might consider actively reintroducing beavers. And that's kind of the catalyst to where the Ealing Beaver project came from. So we've partnered with Citizen Zoo, Friends of Orsenden Hill here, and Ealing Council, so it's kind of a collaborative project to say, do you know what, we know they're coming back. Could be 10 years, could be 20 years, we don't know. Let's start studying now, and let's start stakeholder engagement and talking to people about how we can live alongside beavers again, because, you know, I don't know if you've read the news this week, but the planet's burning, and we need to come up with nature-based solutions to some of our man-made problems, and beavers are absolutely a big part of that arsenal of nature-based solutions. So we want to show the pros and cons of living alongside beavers and how they can be managed, and Paradise Fields is the place where we're going to do that.
Amazing. I actually went up to the Enfield site and I saw where they're keeping the beavers. I went with a friend who lives locally, and he said, I've been here loads of times, I've never seen them, they're very elusive. And we showed up, and there was one right there in front of us in the water, sort of floating along like an alligator.
Amazing.
Keeping an eye on us. And we were like, oh my God. And
You're lucky.
And then he just dipped under, and we saw his big tail. Going
What time of day was it?
Afternoon sometime.
That's very lucky.
It was incredibly lucky, and it was quite a magical experience. And then once we stayed there for a while, and we just looked at the sort of habitat it had created, and it's really different to anything I think people are used to seeing, definitely in urban areas. Yeah. Because it's just extremely messy. Yes. Extremely wet. Yeah. And the water is just everywhere. And there's trees, look like they're fallen down. They've obviously been chopped down. There's bits of wood packed. They've got this their beaver den where they get in under the water. And I think people without a trained eye might look at it and think like, what the hell has happened here? This is an absolute mess. Chaos. Exactly. Once you understand that this has been created, not by us, but by an animal that is just creating a home for itself and a home for lots of other species, it's really quite a magical thing to see. Yeah. I've gone to various beaver enclosures and wild beaver wetlands and things in the UK and in Germany, and the thing it kind of always brings home, it's like this weird, like, primeval sort of feeling where you're walking back into a landscape that existed hundreds of years ago, kind of without human intervention. We've modified our landscape so much, and you've heard of shifting baseline syndrome, no doubt, and we kind of live in our weird little, like, 1 or 2 generations memory and think about, my parents telling me about the countryside they grew up in, and my grandparents telling me about the countryside they grew up in. Beavers are not in living memory, and
The thing about nature is it hates neatness and tidiness, and it loves chaos and mess. And we, as a species, I think have like really gone the wrong direction in terms of keeping everything neat and tidy and ordered and wanting everything to be just so.
Yeah.
And even in the conservation sector, you know, traditional conservation has almost become obsessed with keeping things static and keeping habitats in a certain kind of state of being which is not dynamic and is kind of delayed or kind of held in the one kind of time frame.
Gotcha, yeah.
And that's directed in, you know, good intentions towards conserving certain species or conserving certain habitats. Some of them like man-made or certainly influenced by our activities. Think about a wildflower meadow in the UK. It's like that's a man-made product of agriculture, you know, where we've lost 97% of our wildflower-rich meadows. But if you go back to pre-agricultural times, wildflower-rich meadows didn't really exist. You had more dynamic changing systems with large herbivores opening up canopy woodland and creating this kind of like Serengeti style habitat that was constantly in flux. We've lost that kind of connection to what nature actually does and wants and needs, and that's part of the reason why a lot of our species are kind of like falling off the edge of the cliff in terms of numbers. But yeah, I think going into a beaver wetland, you suddenly see that, do you know what, we're not in charge here. And yeah, these beavers are basically going, I'll have that tree, and it's down in, you know, a night, and we think of that as, oh my God, as I said, trees have almost become this like golden child of conservation and climate change, and you need to plant trees, and you can't cut down a tree without absolute uproar. In the urban community here in Ealing, you know, the council come in and prune a street tree or take down a diseased street tree, and the entire neighbourhood is up in arms going, oh, I can't believe they felled a tree. And it's like, trees need management, and this kind of myth we've been sold that like the entire ecosystem in Britain should be closed canopy woodland and it's all trying to get there, misses out on the fact that actually no, if you go back thousands of years, we had beavers and aurochs and bison, tarpan and bison and all these species that were constantly keeping this open dynamic flow of vegetation, where you had sometimes trees in closed canopy woodland, but then you had gaps in it or felling and new opportunities for different wildlife. So yeah, big waffly kind of roundabout way of saying beaver wetland is an incredible, unique, biodiverse kind of habitat. And yeah, I just think it's absolutely magic. We're anticipating that people are going to start complaining when the beavers flood an area and all the trees die and it looks like this tree graveyard in a pond beaver wetland system. But actually that standing deadwood is going to be habitat for all kinds of things, from your fungi to your beetles to your bats to your birds. And it's going to provide incredible habitat that is necessary and is missing from our kind of current ecosystems because we've lost that keystone species from our habitat. We know that people are going to be like, oh my God, they're causing so much destruction, they're chopping down trees. We need to educate people that this is a natural process and it's actually really good for biodiversity, that we don't have all of the same age trees on that site that have gone unchecked for the last 15-20 years and are shading out all of the aquatic ecosystems there, and we're missing loads of aquatic invertebrates. We've been doing studies and we're missing a lot of species that should be there, but they're not there because there's not enough light getting to the water. And beavers will actually start to introduce that chaos and mess and openness and destruction and death and rot and decay and mess is what nature actually thrives in.
Circle of life.
Yeah. Should we go show you the site?
Let's do that, please.
Cool.
While we walk, can you tell me, you mentioned about potentially reintroducing water voles as well.
Yes.
What's the connection between beavers and water voles?
Yeah, great question. The beaver project in Ealing actually came really from a bit of a light bulb moment when looking for water voles in Ealing. So water voles are our fastest declining mammal in the UK. They're not native to Ireland, but they're here in the UK. And water voles are a species, again, kind of an indicator species of the health of aquatic ecosystems. They want to have kind of open, sunny bankside habitats with lots of aquatic vegetation, biodiversity, and they feed on lots and lots of different plant species in the waterside habitat. And they've sort of been a victim, I guess a victim of like modern times and what we've done with our river systems and things, because we have put pressures on them. So we have canalized our rivers into, straight channels in an misguided effort to alleviate flooding and things like that. We have tidied those messy margins and what rivers and nature wants to do. We've drained the land in those kind of like complex fen and marshland systems that water voles would have thrived in a very 3D kind of environment in every direction. We've lost a load of our wetlands. So we've kind of pushed water voles to the very margin. And then the final insult, we've polluted our waterways as well, and then the final insult is that we unfortunately stupidly released non-native invasive North American mink from the fur farm industry into the British countryside in the 1980s, deliberately and accidentally, through kind of liberation on animal rights and fur farming and just escapees basically. And North American mink naturally would predate on muskrats, which are a very similar animal, slightly larger to water voles in North America, but have evolved alongside mink and can withstand mink predation. Our water voles have not evolved alongside mink, don't have good evasion tactics for mink, and when we've put them into straight lines of all of our wetlands and man-made kind of altered wetlands, unfortunately mink has a very good opportunity to go up and down a bank system on one side of a river or stream and down the next on the opposite side of a river or stream and clear out the entire water vole population. They are stockpilers, so a female mink with a litter of young will literally go up and down a bank system and cache every single water vole she kills in a day or two. So mink have a very, very profound predation effect on water voles because they can follow them into their burrows. We don't really have another aquatic mustelid predator in the UK that's native that can do that. So mink are kind of like the final nail in the coffin for water voles. So we've lost over 60 or 70%, I think, of our water voles in the last 50 years. In Ealing, water voles are a species that we did have clinging on in a few areas, and we had a survey done, commissioned by the council with the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, WWT, in 2009, and they surveyed lots of Ealing's kind of wetland sites and kind of confirmed or suggested that we probably had 5 sites that had potential water vole colonies still clinging on in 2009. I think that the water vole is like almost the symbol of like how much we've screwed over nature in this country, and I thought it very sad, and they captured my imagination. And I remember going to university in Essex and seeing water voles like swimming across the stream as I was going to lectures in the morning and looking at them and going, oh my god, like such an amazing little mammal that I didn't grow up with in Ireland, and was fascinated by them, but thought it was tragic that we'd literally lost them and they'd gone into catastrophic decline. So I decided at the first lockdown during COVID times to use my 1 hour of daily exercise per day to go out and survey those 5 sites that were surveyed in 2009 and see, does Ealing still have water voles left? And my conclusion, sadly, was I don't think we do. I think they've dropped off, because when you start again to push those little wildlife populations into smaller and smaller areas that are isolated from each other, little island populations, all it might take is a single pollution incident or a rogue mink passing through the area to literally clear those out. And when they're fragmented populations and they're not connected to other water vole populations, it just takes that one little thing to kind of tip them over the edge. Or in time, actually, isolation and inbreeding depression, that the population isn't healthy anymore and just slowly dies out. So the conclusion I came to in COVID times was we don't have water voles left. I started looking into water vole conservation, why water voles are, that symbol of like the loss of wildlife on a grander scale, and the symbol of ecosystem health or disease, really. And it kind of came to me quite clearly. I don't remember what the specific time was, but having spoken to people involved in beaver restoration and rewilding and thinking bigger picture on not this little piecemeal approach to conservation of certain habitat types or certain populations of things in isolation in little pocket nature reserves, thinking bigger picture. What did our ecosystem look like before we started meddling with it?
Yeah.
What did water voles really need? It was the beaver. The beaver created these complex wetland systems that water voles and everything else thrived in. And the linear, simplified habitat that we've pushed water voles into in our modern river systems was the factor that actually pushed them over the edge when mink arrived. They just couldn't withstand mink predation. But actually water voles in a beaver wetland, where it's more complex and three-dimensional and spreading out in every which way, water voles can withstand mink predation in those kind of complex wetlands. And I saw it myself in a local site just in a neighbouring borough in Twickenham, where there was a mink kind of on the River Crane in 2018, and it basically cleared out all of the water voles on the linear stretches of the River Crane, but water voles clung on in Crane Park Island Nature Reserve, where it was a complex ditch system of ditches, reed beds and different channels of the River Crane. And in that three-dimensional system, water voles actually managed to evade mink predation, cling on to a small population and rebuild themselves. And I just thought, beavers are the actual missing link as to why water voles aren't withstanding modern life. So I thought about, would we launch a water vole reintroduction project in Ealing? And I knew that it would take a lot of time, effort, money, and it would require us to be doing huge amounts of habitat management, coppicing trees and managing our wetland ecosystems and opening up the canopy to like a lot of our overshaded stretches of the River Brent in Ealing. And I thought, that's crazy, because that's an impossible task to maintain for the next 20 years. What could do that for us? Beavers! And that's where the idea came from, and started floating the idea with John, our ranger, who you might meet in a second, and saying, I think we should skip water voles and go up the rodent ladder to beavers next after harvest mice. And some people were like, oh yeah, that's stupid. You're not going to put beavers back in the River Brent or into Ealing. Like, that's crazy. And I thought, well, why not? I studied in Vancouver in 2003, and I saw beavers in Stanley Park in downtown Vancouver, and thought, they can live alongside people in Vancouver, they can live alongside people in London, and they're solving the problem. They're like the missing link that we've forgotten about because they're not in our generational history anymore, but they're nearly there. They're only 400 years gone. Let's put beavers back, and let's talk about river ecosystem health, and let's talk about this keystone species that can improve water quality, capture carbon, improve fish stocks, improve biodiversity in our aquatic habitats, introduce dead wood into the landscape again, introduce mess and chaos and dynamism and trophic cascades, if you want to go into ecology terms. The thing we're missing in our British landscape is this incredible species that actually, is a real, as I say, biodiversity magic pill. I thought, let's skip that ladder, that rung on the rodent ladder of restoring, our rodents. I heard a great quote, which is about, if we can't even cling on to our rodents in the UK, we're in big trouble in terms of nature conservation. So I've become a big absolute rodent nerd, and I'm like, harvest mice, water voles, beavers, let's get them all back, because they are keystone species. They support a lot of other things, and beavers uniquely really actively support a lot of other things by changing their landscape and being ecosystem engineers. So let's bring you to Paradise Fields.
Let's do it. And
let's show you the habitat as it is now, and hopefully as of October we're getting a family of beavers coming in, and in a year's time it'll be completely transformed. We basically were enclosing the entire site Rather than creating an enclosure within that excludes people, we're actually including people that they can walk through. This path we're about to walk through on the underpass is part of the Capital Ring, which is a circular route around London, and we want to keep it publicly accessible. So we're into the echoey underpass now. And yeah, as I say, this is the gateway to Paradise Fields from a very, very urban context into this amazing kind of sunken, you imagine it as a sunken basin of woodland and meadow and wetlands. And we'll encircle the entire site, or almost the entire site, into an 8-hectare beaver enclosure. And people will be able to walk through here and see the wetland kind of changing and the beaver ecosystem and beaver wetland emerging over time. So it's quite unique in that it's not excluding people from it. It's actually extremely accessible and inclusive. So it's a 10-hectare site. It's about 10% of the entire kind of Horseland complex. And it is, as I say, a sunken basin with 2 water sources coming through. One is this little brook here, which is a tributary of Costons Brook, which comes in under the canal through a man-made culvert and passes through some wet woodland, which I'll show you in a second, into the main lagoon, which is where we're going to release the beavers and where they will probably set up home initially. And then that flows out just behind this sign through, again, a man-made culvert and flows down here into urban Greenford.
Okay.
And the issue we have here is that urban Greenford, around Greenford Station, which is on the tube line, again, central line, is a high flood risk area.
Okay.
So if you think of Paradise Fields as this kind of sponge or sunken kind of wetland that could hold and slow the flow of a lot of water, the council had already earmarked it for some engineering works to try and alleviate flooding in urban Greenford. We've come to them with a nature-based solution and said, do you know what, you can do all of that engineering works, which we've kind of been dilly-dallying around with for the last century or so, or we can actually bring back this ecosystem engineer to do it for us on a much lower budget. So show us the money and we'll reintroduce beavers, and then they will do the work for free. So that's kind of what we anticipate them doing, is damming this brook, and this is a permanent water source, damming the brook, creating more ponds and wetlands, and slowing the flow of water, even in high rainfall incidents where rainwater and street kind of water is flowing into that brook and flash flooding the entire area downstream. And we think that beavers will actually slow that flow and gather water, hold it slower and release it slower, and alleviate that flash flooding event. The other water source is coming in from the pond and kind of ditch system on Horsenden Hill, and flowing in here under another man-made culvert into the upper pond, which is a temporary pond. It tends to dry up in the summertime, so there's only maybe a tiny bit of water in it at the moment for the last few weeks of rain, but it generally dries up in summer. What we think will happen is the initial beaver family will be released here, but as the young start to disperse, they will probably create new wetlands upstream at this upper pond and create even more kind of dynamic wetland systems. So there'll be a little bit of management involved with having one family on site. We'll have to probably trap and relocate and swap our young beavers as they disperse after a year, 2 or 3. To create their own territories. We'll bring them out and swap them with other unrelated individuals from other projects. Okay,
but there's how much space does a beaver need?
Yeah, good question. So the Beaver Trust are the charity that are doing a lot of the translocation projects, and they recommend a family of beavers needs a minimum of 2 hectares of good habitat. So it's not a huge amount.
So what you were just talking about in terms of holding the water on site so it doesn't run downstream to flash flood, I mean that is the exact same sort of concept of, in urban design terms, what we call sustainable drainage systems.
SUDs.
Exactly.
Yes.
SUDs. We're always talking about SUDs basically in master planning and in urban design. And but generally it involves an engineer and a landscape architect going in and designing that in a very man-made way, and then having a management system in place without animals present. So
absolutely.
Beaver just does it anyway.
Beavers do it not for free. We need to put some infrastructure in place to let them in.
And there's even legislation now with the Environment Act saying that all new developments will have to provide sustainable drainage. So there's an understanding, I think, within development, engineering, urban design, that these things are really important. But we haven't, I think, quite made the connection between a rewilding approach and a sustainable drainage approach.
No, we haven't. We're quite a egotistical species, really, aren't we? Like, we think we have all the solutions. A sustainable urban drainage system, SUDs, and we can engineer all of our problems away. And actually, I think the rewilding approach, which I've delved into a lot over the last few years and come to quite, light bulb moment realizations, like, do you know what, nature kind of does it better than us. Has always done it better than us, and some of the problems we've had is where we've tinkered with it a bit too much or tried to control it a bit too much, and it hasn't really worked. And rivers, and the state that our rivers are in at the moment, is a very good example of how we've tried to engineer our way out of certain problems and not allowed rivers to do what they really want to do, which is have floodplains and act naturally and absorb water and release water in a natural way. In our good intentions, but kind of misguided approach, I suppose, we've put rivers into straight channels and said, get the water off the land as quickly as possible, and actually that's caused a lot of problems. And now with climate change in urban areas where we've got increasing population and increased demands on our drainage and river systems, and changing weather and extreme weather events, our rivers are man-made or tinkered rivers are not coping with that. And I think beavers, I totally bang the beaver drum all the time, and it gets boring, I'm sure, for a lot of people, because they're almost hailed as this holy grail of solutions to all of our problems. They're not. They can have some issues as well in the urban landscape, and we want to demonstrate the pros and cons of living alongside beavers here. But beavers do kind of show that, nature kind of had it under control before we started messing with it. And putting beavers back now here onto this urban river catchment, and showing that actually, do you know what? There are nature-based solutions to the issue of flooding downstream here in urban Greenford. There are water quality benefits of having beaver systems in place where they almost create a giant filter-like effect with their ponds and sedimentation, and slowing that flow and allowing effluent and heavy metals and chemical pollution to settle down into the mud layer of their ponds behind their dams and things. The biodiversity benefits, where they're creating complex wetlands that things like water voles can thrive in, and water voles are just the indicator species we can look at and go, yes, water voles are doing well here, which actually means that dozens, hundreds, thousands of invertebrates must also be doing well here that we're not measuring or aren't as easy to monitor. So beavers are kind of this symbolic species that actually can teach us a lot of things about nature knows best. And before we started tinkering with it, things were quite okay. We do live in modern times, we do live in an urban environment with a high population, but we really want to show, as I said to you about, like a kind of the third objective after urban river catchment studies and biodiversity studies, the third objective of this project is seeing how urban communities will interact with beavers as a species, but also the value of having nature on your doorstep, not only kind of in utilitarian terms of like what are the benefits to us in an urban community, but what are the benefits to people's emotional well-being and mental health and enjoyment of stepping outside of that built landscape, beyond that tree line there where you can hear the road traffic, and coming in here. And as I bring you into sight, you honestly just get lost in the place, and it feels like you're out in the countryside anywhere in the country, not in urban London. And we hope that beavers will make it more wild and dynamic and really somewhere that is absolutely bustling with life of a non-human kind.
Can you tell us a little bit about those trophic layers? Maybe compared to how the pond is now, pre-beaver. And then what you'd expect to happen in terms of the plant life, the invertebrates, all the way up to the larger species.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're standing on the main viewing platform now, deck. It's in a little bit of disrepair, so we're going to do a little bit of work on this. But we're standing overlooking the main lagoon on site, which is the largest water body existing on site before the beavers get here. And this will be the site where we release the beavers. So they've already got quite a nice little habitat and refuge to go to get away from people and dogs. And beavers view dogs as wolves. Historically, their predator was wolves in the landscape. We don't have those anymore, but we have the domestic pampered version of wolves. As a vet, I'll say no more. But yeah, so beavers they'll probably settle here if you think about the map that I just showed you, this is the main water body before water leaves the site and goes through a man-made culvert out into urban Greenford.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it percolates through this reed bed on our right-hand side, and it goes in through a culvert and gets released out into kind of the sewer and drainage system in Greenford. Upstream of this, so if you look in the corner on the left where those willow trees are, there's the brook running into this lagoon and then percolating out. So what the beavers, we anticipate what they'll do is they'll start to move upstream of this lagoon and create some dams and hold some of the water and start to make beaver ponds that percolate out horizontally across the landscape up through here. You can see it's completely dominated and almost closed canopy now of willow that hasn't been managed or coppiced in many, many years. And the beavers will start to fell some of those trees, not only for food, so they'll be eating the leaves and the bark of that willow tree, but they'll also be using the timber for building their dams and lodges. And what we anticipate then is basically we'll get this series of ponds and open wetland systems up here. And at the moment, there's a dragonfly just flying over. Beautiful. At the moment, we've been doing a lot of surveying, baseline ecological surveying before the beavers arrive, to try and determine what's living here now and how biodiverse is the site currently. Dragonflies are a good example. You would think that in an aquatic ecosystem like this we would have lots of different dragonfly species and high numbers of them, but we don't. And I think the reason is that this lagoon is almost the only open water that has light coming to it.
Oh, wow.
The rest of the aquatic ecosystem is completely dominated and overshaded. And if you think about the trophic layers or the food web, and how energy works in an aquatic ecosystem, the fundamental energy source for an aquatic ecosystem is light. And when you get sunlight hitting water and aquatic kind of habitats, you get microscopic algae growing, then you get microscopic invertebrate life like daphnia and water fleas and different things that are filter feeding on the microscopic algae in the water column, and then you get larger invertebrates like damselfly, dragonfly larvae feeding on those small invertebrates, and you get larger invertebrates feeding on them. You get birds and bats feeding on the emergent larvae turning into flying insects. You get reptiles and amphibians feeding around the perimeter, and you get all those layers of the food chain basically thriving. Paradise Field is an interesting site because in 2009 it was one of those 5 sites where the WWT determined there were signs of water voles here. It was much more open and a fresher, younger wetland at that time. But what was it missing? Traditional conservationists would say it was missing habitat management by people. The rangers should have been in here coppicing the willow trees and keeping it open and dynamic and getting light into the stream, and it's been let overgrow. No, what's it actually missing? It's missing beavers, right? Beavers were here 400, 500 years ago doing that job for us and keeping those trophic cascades in flux and keeping them dynamic and changing all the time, and taking down, 2 or 3 of these willow trees will have a completely different microhabitat to some of the willow trees upstream, and they're doing that in a kind of mosaic changing pattern all the time. It's actually creating loads and loads of microhabitats and mosaic habitat that different species can thrive in, rather than we've now got a huge stand, almost the entire site is dominated by 30-year-old crack willow. It's just it's a monoculture in a way, and then you lose biodiversity value. So what we anticipate over the next 5 years of the project is that beavers will start to change this completely, and some of those trees will come down. Some people will be like, oh my god, shock horror, there's dead trees and fallen trees. But actually it's introducing that dynamism, that chaos, that kind of trophic cascade, that a fallen tree results in this actual incredible explosion of biodiversity that comes from the light that's introduced when you fell that tree. So we're going to see incredible results. The baseline surveying we've had here is showing up, a variety of species. We're doing bat surveys, we're doing odonata or dragonfly damselfly surveys. we've done aquatic invertebrate surveys, and we've got fairly poor results. This looks like a natural oasis and an amazing wildlife site, but in terms of what it could be, it's pretty poor. And what we're hopefully going to see with the beaver's input as a keystone species is that this poor biodiversity is going to turn into a really rich biodiversity, and we're going to see an explosion of life in all of the layers, from invertebrates like our dragonflies, see a few of them hawking over the pond here, to amphibians, reptiles, birds, bats, all of these things that we can measure, which are very visible or easy to monitor, which actually indicate that there's tons and tons of other things we're not seeing happening as well, you know?
I think the more and more I learn about ecology, the more I realise really fundamentally it's all about movement of energy and chemicals through the system. And am I right in saying as well that, you know, okay, people think a dead tree is a loss because it's a loss of life. It's now a dead piece of wood. But actually, as that comes into the river, that's adding nutrients back into the river environment, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's capturing carbon as well. You know, it's like death is part of life. And we are living in a very sanitized world where we don't like mess, and we abhor death, and we are fearful of death and decay. But that's a natural part of life. It's like everything living has to die. And we tend to tidy up dead stuff, and trees are a good example, where if you were a landowner, you know, hundreds of years ago, and a large tree died on your land, well, the good, you know, laborious Christian thing to do was to tidy that up because it's mess, and you were a lazy farmer if you didn't tidy up the dead tree on your land. But actually, that's a natural part of the ecosystem, and a standing dead tree, which we're going to get here not only through beavers felling trees or ring barking trees and causing them to die, we're going to get it because they will flood some of the forest here, and the trees that don't like wet conditions, so not the birch or willow or alder, but some of the maybe oak trees or ash trees that are here will die where they stand right now. Standing deadwood is one of the most biodiverse habitats in our native British ecosystems because it supports tons and tons of life as it decays over years and years. It starts with, you know, your kind of microorganisms like your fungi and your bacteria and things, and then you get saprolytic beetles that move in and start eating the dead wood, stag beetles, which are one of our most impressive and rare species, which are thriving in London, and Ealing in particular is one of the boroughs is best for stag beetles, and they're feeding on decaying wood. Their larvae live underground feeding on decaying wood for 7 years before they emerge as a beetle. And so there's all these things that we've sort of like either eliminated from the landscape or really pushed to the edge or have forgotten about because we want it to be tidy, that rely on death and decay in the natural ecosystem. So we know this is going to be a really big sticking point for this project. We know that people who are used to the status quo of, you know, what nature looks like now and what we think is beautiful now is that shifted baseline of what it actually used to be and wanted to be. And it's got a human aesthetic tidiness lens on it. And we know that people walking through here that have walked through here maybe with their dog or cycled through here for years and years are going to go, oh my God, that beaver project is something else. It looks catastrophic. There's loads of dead trees. It's disgusting. It looks terrible. I can't believe the destruction those animals are causing. We have to kind of turn that on its head and reteach people that, no, this is life. It looks like death, but this is life. This is dynamism. This is natural, diverse, you know, ecosystems that are truly wild and not man-made and not man-managed. And there's going to be elements of the project, I think, that we're going to be uncomfortable with as traditional conservationists. And our ranger already is like a massive tree nerd and fan of trees. And he says, oh, I'm going to struggle seeing all these trees dying. And it's like, they're going to introduce life. It's fine, John. Honestly, we can have dead trees alongside living trees. So it's flipping the kind of traditional outlook on how we manage nature on its head. And we're really putting these beavers in the driving seat here and letting them take charge, take control, and create a bit of chaos and a bit of mess in here and seeing what happens.